Okay, this is a video about British architecture, individualism and collectivism in Britain and Japan, Japanese interdependence, I'll define that in a second, and or Ubuntu philosophy. I'll start with that because it's something I came across very recently. Apparently in many countries in Africa there is a Ubuntu philosophy made famous recently by the operating system of the same name. But the philosophy refers to the belief that people exist in their relationships, or for instance, there's a Zulu proverb, I won't attempt to say it in Zulu, which says that a person is a person because of people. A person is a person because of people, and that's central idea to Ubuntu philosophy, that we are who we are because of other people. We exist in our relationships, and this is the same philosophy as proposed by Marcus and Kitayama in their seminal paper on Japanese philosophy and culture, which proposes that Japanese people believe themselves to be interdependent. Essentially the same thing. They are who they are because of their relationships with other people, because of the collective, because of their close friends, because of their community. Okay, so there is this philosophy which says that humans are not born into the world as individuals. Another one of those African ones, which I rather like, said that when there's only one of you, you're like a wild animal, but when there's two of you, you become a person. I like that one. Okay, so now we're moving on to individualism and collectivism in Japan, and architecture in specifically. And I went to Britain recently, and I took a video which I narrate in Japanese. You can see it on my channel, which I point out that there's a great deal of very conformist or normal architecture in Britain, such as rows and rows of terraced and detached houses, estates with tens or even hundreds of houses that all look essentially the same in Britain. And this is shared by much of Europe, partly because there's strict planning permission regulations, and that houses have to be, are required to be similar to and in harmony with their neighbours' houses, and that people are quite happy to, well, they're annoyed at times. I know people in Britain that don't want to conform to the planning regulations, and they're a fuss. But it is a fact that British and European villages and towns are often quite uniform and conformist. And someone wrote back to me saying that, that people don't want to be, it's just because it's cheaper that way, and I agree. All over the world I think that people would rather, there is a sort of downside to conformance. We'd all like to express ourselves, have our own style of house, I would want to build it this way, have it that colour, express ourselves in our house. And also people are afraid of ostracisation, and occasionally they want to mimic their friends, like, hey, my friend's got this kind of house, I think I have one too, and that kind of thing happens. Or generally speaking, I think that we'd like to be who we are, but we're kind of afraid what would happen if everyone's like what they are. Like if I build a sort of neo-Gothic house, will someone build a Baroque or a pink monstrosity, pink Art Deco monstrosity next to me? So people think sort of some kind of Leviathan kind of, we almost compromise. We've got to have a Leviathan, a sort of an axe over our head, say, no, planning permission, you've got to do it like this too, because otherwise there'll be chaos. Our cities will fall to rack and ruin, and everyone will have pink monstrons, pink and blue and green, and various styles of houses all higgledy-piggledy next to each other, and it'll look terrible. And so people in Britain say, well, that's okay, we'll have planning permission. But this doesn't happen in Asia, and if you go to Asian cities, you'll find that they do have these monstrosities. You walk through towns in which people have got gargoyles and sort of Swiss, French, American, neoclassical, all kinds of styles of houses, all just within the same estate, within the same road, within the same street, next to each other, completely ignoring any sense of harmony at all. And this in a country which we learn is very harmonious. Generally speaking, the Japanese are seen as people who care more about ostracisation, are more likely to want to mimic each other, are more likely to accept the sort of regulation of social behaviour so as to achieve greater social harmony. So why is it that in the field of architecture the Japanese are much more likely to be wacky and zany and unharmonious, whereas the British are seen to be the people who go for the harmony. Well, the general explanation of this, I would say, is that that British people don't see architecture as being as important as Japanese people, because they would see architecture as something in the world of appearance. The box that I live in, it's just a box, you know, it's my space. The importance of the inside, the functionality, the value it has to me, the way I feel towards it. The box, it's a bit like my shirt or my hair, or my lack of it, or my glasses, or my appearances aren't that important. That face, clothes, appearance, mere appearance, is not as important as things that Westerners value, and therefore being required to conform in this sphere of architecture is not seen as something that is terribly, well, not terribly distressing to a Western person. The sphere of appearance, you know, it's not important. People who are into it are dismissed. You know, you're into appearance. So there's a strange contradiction that arises out of this, that the Japanese, who, with all their zany architecture, and not only architecture, there's a good book by Donald Ritchie called The Image Factory, Fads and Fashions in Japan, which points out that the Japanese create many different types of appearances, such as manga, or television personalities, or anime, or cosplay, or zany fashion, zany boots, zany, all sorts of appearances, including architecture. Japanese architects are known the world over for creating zany things, but all of these are the world of appearances, and despite their creativity, despite their lack of uniformity, they can be described as being an aspect of, in fact, contradictorily, paradoxically, groupism, because they're appearances. And so, in other words, the Japanese care so much about appearance that they involve themselves in all these fads and fashions as they're described in. And this contradiction, what seems to me to be a paradox, does not grate upon Western ears. Yeah, you're into that weird shirt, those jeans that bag down to your knees, those shoes that curl up around your toes, not because you're an individualist, but because of what you care so much about how other people think of you. So many people will accept that. I'm going to go on a sort of a more Ubuntu wavelength eventually, and I'm going to suggest that no, this isn't the case. That what we have here rather is not a difference in decree in which people care about the eyes of the other. It's in what way we care about being perceived by others. And it seems to me that while Westerners, cutting to chase here, and it would need a lot of other videos to sort of justify this, while Westerners don't care about visual appearances, we do care about how our ideas are perceived. And you can see this in, for instance, papers by Hee-Jun Kim, where expressing ourselves linguistically is seen to be very, very important. And I think that the important distinction for Westerners is that we think that appearances, i.e. visual things, need the eyes of another in order to be perceived. Yeah? So that, for instance, my own face is not something I can see until I've got a camera in front of me, or a mirror, or another person, whereas my own words are something I can see, hear and understand. I can hear and understand, and they are internal to me. And I've seen Stephen Hine say this about, you know, my own values. They're something that I don't need any audience to make meaningful to myself, whereas appearances need the eyes of another or a mirror. However, now it seems to me that contradictorily, for the Japanese, words are things that we spit out. I'm saying now as we, as a Japanese person, words I spit out to an audience, and that they don't have any meaning for me. I express my words for an audience. And so it is appearances, on the contrary, in Japan, that are seen and experienced in the personal, as an internal, something that for self-consumption. So for a Japanese person, someone who's got all sorts of pontificationary theories and values is someone who cares about the ears of others, who cares about how they express themselves to others, whereas someone with the right appearance, the nice house, the nice cars, the nice visual expressions of self, that is the person who is self-possessed. Because in Japan, it is felt that it is vision which is always and continuously self-consumed. The internalized, and this is the final punchline, the internalized eye of the other in Japan is is always present, that they can always see themselves from the point of view of essentially a god, a super addressee, a superego. The Japanese superego sees rather than hears. And so appearances are not something out there for other people. They are something that they can consume themselves. Conversely, we Westerners believe that words are not just words, these things that we spit out, these phonemes, these things that come out for other people. They are always part of a world in which there's always an ear, there's always a super addressee to our language, which therefore makes them self-consumed. My words are not for others, they're also for myself. How, private languages are impossible because I always have a super addressee.